Jai Shri Ram. I was listening to a Kannada bhajan originally written by Purandara Dasa, as I sometimes do. This particular one is called Smaraṇe Māḍo Nirantara, meaning keep Hari in your mind without end, always. And so in this very short poem written by Purandara Dasa, he mentions a couple characters who called the name of Sri Hari in their hour of need, and he came and helped them. Specifically, he mentions Gajendra, Prahalada, and Draupadi, which I think, or at least hope, that you would all be familiar with these stories. But he also mentions another person who I think a lot of Hindus may not be familiar with, which is Ajamila. Ajamila's story comes to us from the Bhagavata Purana. He was originally a very religious, practicing Brahmin who kept to all of his rituals and so on, the kind of thing that Hindus would refer to as quote-unquote orthodox. And he was known as being a very morally upright person. But one day, when he was gathering flowers for his daily puja, he sees a prostitute and her client about to go off and have sex. And he becomes very interested in this woman and eventually employs her as the maid in his home. And he eventually becomes so attached to her that he leaves his own wife and child to go make a life with this prostitute. So now, instead of living his moral Brahmin, or living with his moral Brahmin wife, he's living with this prostitute instead. So all of these dharmic traits and habits that he used to have in his life go away. The rituals, the bhakti, the study, all of those things stop. And he just becomes a totally morally bankrupt, hedonistic kind of a person, a bhogi, as we would say. And he also resorts to a lot of theft and robbery in order to finance his lifestyle, in order to continue to support this woman and buy her gifts and things like that. So this is how he basically lives out the entire rest of his life for decades. And he's about to die, and on his deathbed, he calls out Narayana, Narayana. So there's that theme again of calling out to Vishnu, saving someone. So he says Narayana, Narayana, but he's not actually calling out to Vishnu. He's calling out to his youngest son with this prostitute, who he has named Narayana. But regardless of that, hearing the name of Narayana chanted or said by a dying man in his hour of need, Vishnu sends his Vishnu Dutas to come and save him. And now it's important to note two things about this story, right? So the Vishnu Dutas come and save him from the Yamadutas who are going to take him to Patal or somewhere. Now there's two important things to note about this story. One is that compared to the other ones, you see a great deal of immorality from Ajamila, like I had mentioned. You don't see that with Gajendra, Prahalada, or Draupadi living a life of adharma and being totally immoral, evil people. Those three obviously were not doing that, where Ajamila was. And the second thing is, the other three were all intending to call out to Vishnu, while Ajamila was not, right? Gajendra called out to Vishnu and he came. Prahalada called out to Vishnu and he came as Narasimha. Draupadi called out to Krishna and he gave the unending sari, right? And like I said, Ajamila was not doing that. He was calling out to his son, who happened to have one of Vishnu's names. And I feel that this is such a powerful story and so appropriate for our modern day times because, one, it emphasizes the importance of naam japa, because all of these characters were saved because they called out the name of Sri Hari. And remember, I said in the beginning, the poem that sparked this thought process for me was about encouraging people to remember Sri Hari. Hari Smarane Māḍo Nirantara is what it was called, as I said. And it's such an easy kind of a practice to begin, and it's easy to make a part of your daily routine. And the other reason that I think the Ajamila story in particular is so important is because it's a story of redemption, where a previously good person turned bad and is later redeemed through the power of Vishnu. And this kind of theme is more important now than ever before, because more and more people today have given up certain dharmic practices and lifestyle choices that they maybe used to hold on to earlier in their life, or they used to hold on to in previous generations, and now they've instead adopted an immoral, hedonistic kind of lifestyle and practices and habits that come from the society around them, as we saw with Ajamila. So I see it as an encouragement to change one's ways and get back onto the right path. Because after this part of the story that I mentioned, Ajamila is then there's a version of this where he is allowed to live, for a longer period of time and becomes, very religious and all of those kinds of things. Right? So basically the reason that I thought it was important to talk about this, like I said, is that it's an encouragement of the importance of this particular habit of naam japa, and that's also a very easy thing to make part of your daily habits. I mean, I personally do it the first thing that I wake up in the morning, and also the last thing that I do before I go to bed. Now, it's also important to look at this in context, right? We see this story about Ajamila not to be kind of antinomian and say, oh, you can just live however you want to live and do whatever you want. As long as you say, the names of Hari, then everything will be fixed. That's obviously not the point here. But, I think in our modern day, people are going to look at this story and say, hey, this guy gave up all of his good qualities and he was still saved by this thing. So I can just, do some kind of workaround or use some kind of a spiritual loophole in order to get whatever I want, while still, living a totally immoral, hedonistic kind of lifestyle, that I can still be saved when the time comes. Now, obviously, no guru is going to explain this in this way. No, the Puranas themselves don't explain that story in this way. But when people take things out of context, which is very natural in the modern day, that's definitely something that could happen, which I think, again, it's important to realize that in this particular poem that I mentioned, he is mentioned along with three other people who, they were moral, good people that were in trouble, right? Gajendra, Prahalada, and Draupadi. Obviously, Gajendra is not a human being, but it's always important to keep that kind of context in mind, right? We see that in the modern day, people will attack Lord Ram, people will attack Krishna for doing this or that, and they'll look through a kind of modern lens of just trying to say, how can I look at this and then justify how I already think and feel and act, right? That's obviously not the way that we want to look at this story, even though I'm sure people will take it out of context and look at it that way. I think that it's always important to look at these kinds of redemptive stories like Ajamila, because lots of times people have some kind of positive thing that they're doing, and then because of, in his case, sense gratification, people leave behind something good that they were doing, right? I think we can all relate to this kind of an impulse, whether we've actually done something like that. We've all been tempted to do something like that, right? Regardless of whether we have actually done it. Obviously not something as heinous as, leaving our family and marrying a prostitute, but something that is also immoral that we would want to do in order to satisfy our base, desires for sensual pleasure. So keeping these stories in mind, and of course doing naam japa and things like that, these are very important, and that's basically the point of this video. So please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Jai Shri Ram.